The 22 O-line recruiting class is going to be an interesting one, Brian. Notre Dame took 5 offensive linemen in the 21 class, but I think they had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, I don't know that they need 5, but I think any year, offensive lineman-wise, you at least need 4. And I feel like if you don't get 4, you're not doing what you need to do. And that 5th spot is reserved almost for like if a stud wants to come,
right,
like we were talking about with the tight ends earlier. If you save that 5th spot for that. But I think you need 4. Do you see that any different with the 22 class? And they already have 2 guys committed.
No, I'm with you. I think there's and the reason I would be okay with a 5th guy is because look at recent recruiting, right? Like the 2018 class is down to 2 guys. Right. Luke Jones transferred and Cole Mabry had to retire from football. It's down to 2 guys. The 2019 class has yet to really make an impact, and Quentin Carroll's already had a major injury. The 2020 class, which is really good. And then that 2019 class, John Olmstead's already transferred out. Then your 2020 class, your number 1 and number 2 guys were both really good. Tosh Baker is a 5-star upside guy, and Michael Carmody's really good. But you only got 2. So you really have in 3 straight classes, you had 4, but that's down to 2. You had 4 that's down to 3, and you had 2. So from what's on the roster right now, Notre Dame doesn't have enough to have a 2 deep from the 2018 to 2020 classes. That's problematic.
Yeah.
The other problematic aspect of it is they took Pat Coogan and some guys that to me are the difference between the 2021 recruiting class, which everybody's talking about how great it was. And it was a very good class. Don't get me wrong. But like go back to the 2013 recruiting class. All 5 guys in that class were top 200 recruits on the 247 Sports Composite list. The number 3 guy in the 2014 class that had Quentin Nelson, Alex Bars, and Sam Mustipher. Sam Mustipher was your number 3. He was the number 225 player in the country. Jimmy Byrne was a 4-star recruit as your number 4 guy. And so you look through the years, you look at 2017, your number 3 guy was Aaron Banks or Josh Lugg, depending on who you viewed as your. So the number in the 2019 class, which was highly ranked, your 4th guy was a top 200 recruit. In the 2021 class, there's a bigger drop off after the top 2 guys.
Yeah.
And now there's some upside there. I think Joe Alt's a guy. I wrote about this on signing day. Joe Alt could be the difference between this being a really good class and a great class, but he's a low floor, high ceiling guy. You can't ever anticipate those guys panning out until they actually pan out.
Right.
Caleb Johnson's a good, tough player, but he's not your typical great Notre Dame number 3 O-line recruit. And then Pat Coogan, with all honesty, is just a good player, but he's more of a backup kind of guy. And so you didn't land the depth of talent in 2015 or 2021. So that 5 is a little misleading to me. It's not a 5 that we're used to Notre Dame getting where you've got 3 or 4 legit top 200 players. I mean, your number 4 guy in 2020 or 2019 was John Olmstead, who was a top 250 recruit. He's already transferred out because there was some depth ahead of him. Your number 3 guy was Andrew Kristofic, who was ranked like 175th or somewhere around there in that class. Well, Caleb Johnson and Joe Alt aren't even top 300 players.
Yeah.
When you look at now, again, recruiting rankings aren't end all be all, but on my evaluation as well, they're not that. On Notre Dame's evaluations, they weren't that because those are guys that got offered after they missed on all their top prospects, right? So, that's the thing is they had like running back. They put all their eggs in a very small basket, and they didn't read the room well. And what I mean by that is they kept waiting on Landon Tengwall, who eventually committed to and signed with Penn State. And I kept saying, you need to move on now from Landon Tengwall because he had made multiple visits to Michigan, multiple visits to Penn State. He committed to Penn State shortly after the pandemic, and a lot of people said, well, that was only because he was going to visit in April, but that got canceled. He had a year to visit Notre Dame. He had visited Notre Dame the previous March. In that time between then and his decision, when he was supposed to visit Notre Dame again, he made multiple trips to Michigan, multiple trips to Penn State.
Yep.
You're not reading the room right.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it was clear that you were never in the same level as those two programs. You should have moved on. Now, that doesn't mean you should have stopped recruiting him.
But have a backup.
Yeah. And so they missed out on a chance to get Wyatt Milam, who to me is a top 100 recruit. And I've read other people that like him a lot too. He ended up going to West Virginia. I talked to the guy that covers West Virginia for SI before he committed, and he said if Notre Dame pushes for him, he's Notre Dame's. That was the feeling in the state. But Notre Dame never pushed for him. So they put all their eggs in the baskets, and then Nolan Rucci is another one. That was always going to be either Wisconsin or Penn State. Notre Dame was never going to get that kid, but they stayed on him so long that by the time they moved on, it was kind of Caleb Johnson they initially missed out on because they tried to get on him late, and he was like, well, you guys waited until you missed on all these other guys. And if Auburn doesn't have a dumpster fire of a season, they may not even have Caleb Johnson. So they were able to recover with a good class, but the strategy needs some refinement. Yeah. And you had that happen at running back. And my concern, Vince, is that this staff has shown that when the results end up being good, they don't do as much internal self-evaluation of their process. That's a concern. Hopefully that's not the case now, but that's a concern that I have. And they're going to have an expanded O-line board, which so far they've done. It's a big O-line board so far. I'm very happy with the board, but I don't know how many of the guys on the board that they're actually going hard after. That's a bit more concerning.
Sure.
And so you've put yourself in a really good position with two guys. Joey Tanona, to me, was a good prospect when they got him, Vince. He was he's an in-state kid from Zionsville, I believe, correct? Okay. I liked him when they got him as a sophomore. He was a tackle. I said, I think the kid's got a chance to play some tackle. Maybe he could move inside, and he was a top 200 player. Then they moved him to center as a junior, and I'm like, this kid is natural inside. Okay. He's an absolute natural inside player. He was phenomenal as a junior center. Loved his film as a junior. So to me, he's a top 100 to 125 caliber player as a center. And if you can play center, you can play guard, right? But as an interior player, Ty Chan is a guy that didn't play as a junior. Very high ceiling, low floor. He's highly ranked. He's a top 200 kid, but right now he's a bit of a project. So you've got a really good foundation to build on.
You got a good start, right?
Right. So now it's what are you going to build on it, right? So if you build on it with like Zach Rice, for example, from Virginia, 5-star player, likes Notre Dame a lot, but he also likes Ohio State and North Carolina and Alabama a lot, right? Those are big time. I mean, Alabama and Ohio State do a pretty good job of recruiting and developing offensive linemen, so it's going to be a battle. That's a guy you got to get. Jake Taylor from Bishop Gorman's, not as highly ranked, but he's, to me, a high talent. He would be a guy you'd get, Vince, and he's ranked in the top 200, but to me, he's a top 100 talent, right? So that just tells you I don't really care about recruiting rankings unless the recruiting rankings back up what I believe to be true. Does that make sense? So, like, if they get a top 100 guy, I'm not going to be like, oh, question, problem solved, but he's not a real top 100 guy. He's just whatever ranked as a top 200 guy. And Notre Dame staff talked about the difference there. Jake Taylor's not a highly ranked guy, mainly because he didn't play as a junior because Nevada didn't have fall football. But, man, he is athletic. He's tough. I mean, that is, to me, a big-time player, and they're battling Oklahoma for him. Yeah. Well, when Notre Dame and Oklahoma both want a guy, those are two of the best offensive lines in the country. And Bill Blankenship at Oklahoma is phenomenal coach and recruiter and identifier of talent. You get those two guys, home run. Like Jeff Quinn, great recruiter, buddy. Good job. Billy Strouth's another guy that they're on. You get those two guys, and then Billy Strouth wants to come from Wisconsin. You take them, and you get your 5. So there's some guys on the board they just recently offered Tyler Booker, who's one of the highly ranked offensive linemen from Florida. He's from IMG. He's a New Jersey kid, so that makes you think, there's a chance, Jersey kid, but they got on him kind of late. Joe Bruner from Wisconsin. It's a really good year in Wisconsin offensive lineman. He's another guy on the board. Carson Hensman's another really top player from Wisconsin. But, again, going into Wisconsin and beating Wisconsin for offensive linemen is going to be hard. Doing it for more than one is going to be extremely tough. Jacob Sexton's a kid from Oklahoma that's looking at Notre Dame and Oklahoma. I have a hard time seeing him leave the state. He says all the right things about Notre Dame, but I have a hard time seeing it. So there's some talented players on the board, but they got to close, and they got to close with You cannot take an offensive lineman that's ranked that's on, not from a recruiting service standpoint, but more so from you and I and the staff talking talent. Ty Chan's got to be your floor. You can't take a Pat Coogan in this class. To me, I don't think you can take a Joe Alt in this class. You can't take a Caleb Johnson in this class.
Developmental guy.
Right. It's got to be Ty Chan or better. Simple as that. And if they can do that, then I think they're now in a great place. They've been able to you had a little bit of the ended Harry Hiestan's tenure in the first couple years of Jeff Quinn's era. There were some numbers issues and different things, but to me, this is the class that could solidify that, solve those problems, and get you on a healthier place where you can now be 4 every year, occasionally take 3.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yep.
So I think that's where they're at. But there's a chance. I mean, the start is strong. You've got 2 really good players in the class. And the final thing is, to me, the guys they get have to mostly be tackle bodies. They've taken a lot of guard bodies in the last couple of years. Carmody's a guard. Spindler's a guard. Coogan's a guard. I think Caleb Johnson ultimately is probably more of a guard. And then I could see Blake Fisher being – I mean, I could see all 5 of the guys they signed last year being guards, interior players.
Right.
They won't all end up there just because they can't. But you can make a case that all of them might have more upside at guard than they do at tackle.
Sure. No, it makes a lot of
Michael
sense.
Carmody's a guard. So only 1 of your 2 in 2020 was a guard, a tackle. You need tackles in this class. Ty Chan's a tackle, but Joey Tanona's already moved inside.
I'd much rather have tackles that you can convert inside than the other way around.
Well, that's how Harry Hiestand was. I mean, even Sam Mustipher, who was clearly going to play inside in college, or was a tackle in high school. Yeah. The thing about a lot of these guys Notre Dame has taken, they're guard. I mean, Rocco Spindler was a guard in high school. Pat Coogan was a guard in high school. Right. You know what I mean? Like Michael Carmody was a tackle. He could maybe play right tackle, but those are the kind of guard bodies they need. Michael Carmody's 6'5", 6'6", right? Joey Tanona could play tackle. He's a tackle body, even though I now project him inside. Ty Chan could move inside, but he's a tackle body. You need guys that can play tackle.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Right, and I'm agreeing with you. I'm kind of elaborating a little bit. Like, you look at Notre Dame's starting offensive line at the beginning of the 2020 season. All 5 of their starting offensive linemen began their career at tackle, at left tackle, when they first arrived on campus. Aaron Banks got reps as a freshman at left tackle. Robert Hainsey got reps at left tackle. I think Tommy Kramer's the only one that didn't, because they immediately put him in right tackle.
Gotcha.
But and I think 3 of the 5 started games at tackle, because Robert Hainsey and Tommy Kramer both played tackle in 2017. So that was Harry Hiestan's approach, and I think a lot of schools go that route, but not all do. Bama will recruit some pure guards. You know what I mean? But most of your guys need to be, to me, tackle types and tackle bodies, and that's it. But that's what Jake Taylor's that. Zach Rice is that. A lot of those guys are that way.